security system called Alert. Airline advertisements say the security includes screening passengers, employees, baggage, aircraft, and airport facilities with great thoroughness. Transatlantic passengers pay an extra $5 per ticket for the procedures. But the system apparently was not in effect in Karachi, Pakistan. According to Pan Am, security at Karachi Airport is handled by the Pakistani government. And although Pan Am says it approved the security procedures used there, no Pan Am employees took part in the security measures. Airline industry consultant David Tritel.
There is a credibility problem now with any claims as to security, depending on what happens, with the investigation and when we find out what happens with this incident.
Pan Am Flight 73 apparently was stormed by gunmen dressed as airport security guards. Coincidentally, in a letter to the editor in Friday's Wall Street Journal, Pan Am Vice Chairman Martin Shagru said at some airports, uniformed crew members may be permitted to bypass security checkpoints upon presenting proper ID. But the letter says at many others, even airport staff members must clear security checkpoints each time they are allowed access to a Pan Am plane. Shagru ended the letter, quote, "No one boards a Pan Am aircraft until we are convinced the security equation is complete," unquote. Ironically, Pan Am's new security system had been given high marks by many airline industry experts. But those same experts say the bottom line is there's no feasible way any airline can completely guard against terrorism. Tim Ulinger, CNN, at the Pan Am headquarters in New York.
The Pan Am pilot and other members of the cockpit crew were able to get out of the hijacked airliner, as we mentioned earlier. They got out through an escape hatch, a 747 design feature that allows them to get away out of the sight of the hijackers. CNN's Dave Monsees has more on that now in New York.
Because the flight deck of the 747 is on the airplane's second floor, there are two emergency exits for the cockpit crew separate from the passenger doors. One contains an inflatable slide, but aviation experts believe the Pan Am crew got out through a hatch in the cockpit ceiling and let themselves down to the tarmac by holding onto a cable inertia reel that paid out at a constant speed as each crewman lowered himself to the ground. All this could take place behind a closed cockpit door without the hijackers being aware of the escape. Experts say all three crew members could have escaped within 20 seconds. The cable somewhat resembles a water ski tow rope with a handle on one end. The other end is attached to an inertia system that steadily lowers an evacuee to the ground. The Boeing company, which makes the 747, says the system was devised as an emergency exit in the event of a crash, but this time it allowed the crew to escape and denied the hijackers a crew to fly the plane. Dave Monsees, CNN, New York.
Business executives gathered at a seminar in New York today to talk about business crises like the one now affecting Pan Am. CNN's Deborah Marchini reports.
As last year's TWA hijacking demonstrates, corporate crises aren't always a corporation's fault, but that doesn't make them any less costly.
About the time the plane's generator ran out of fuel. For nearly 17 hours, the 5 hijackers had been demanding a fresh crew to fly them to Cyprus. They'd assured officials nobody else on board would be harmed if that happened. The men had wounded 2 baggage handlers when they'd shot their way onto the plane just after dawn Friday.
पैसेंजरों से क्रॉस लगवा रहे थे किसका सामान कौन सा है किसका कौन सा है तो अचानक अमेरिका के जहाज के अंदर की तरफ से गोलियां आनी शुरू हो गई तो ये एक गोली जो थी ब्रश की शक्ल में मेरे हाथ में दाहिने हाथ में लगी.
A passenger said flight attendants reported the gunman singled out Kenyan-born American Rajesh Kumar, called him to the front of the plane and shot him in the head, then dumped his body on the ground. The flight crew had escaped from the cockpit when the shooting began, but they left the plane's generator running. As Pakistani officials tell it, first the nearby terminal lights were switched off, darkening the area where the plane was parked. Troops began moving in, and when the generator stopped running, the plane's interior lights went out, and the gunmen aboard started shooting and tossing grenades.
They started to shoot at us from point-blank range with automatic weapons. People were literally hurled on one another, and everybody was just screaming and yelling and taking covers wherever they could find.
Passengers popped doors and escape chutes in a frantic effort to get out of the way. More than 100 did not get out of the way, wounded or killed in those last frantic moments. Among the casualties, the hijackers, 2 dead, another 2 reportedly wounded but taken alive. The head of Pakistan Civil Aviation had identified the hijackers as Arabs and said the one who called himself Mustafa made the demand to fly to Cyprus to free colleagues imprisoned there. There are prisoners in Cyprus who've been involved in Middle East-related terrorism. 2 Arabs and a Briton are serving life sentences for the murder of 3 Israelis aboard a moored yacht a year ago. The Cyprus government quickly refused landing permission when the hijackers' demands became known, and anti-terrorist troops quickly sealed off Larnaca Airport. There was a claim in Cyprus that the hijackers were from a pro-Libyan group, another in Beirut that they were pro-Iranian. Lebanon and Iran had joined Cyprus in refusing landing rights, and Libyan state radio denied any connection. Cyprus has released prisoners in the past in response to the demands of hijackers, but this time the hijacking ended before things ever got that far. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
For many of the families of those on board flight, there still is uncertainty about their loved ones even at this late hour. One family was in mourning even before the terrorist incident came to its violent end. They knew that the man they had been waiting for had been the hijackers' first victim. CNN's Chuck Conder reports.
Rajesh Kumar was the first victim slain in the terrorist takeover of Pan Am flight number 73. His body was thrown from the giant 747 as it sat on the runway of the Karachi airport late Thursday. In Huntington Beach, California, friends and relatives accepted the news with disbelief.
And he wasn't the sort to make heroics or anything like that, you know. A very quiet person, family-oriented.
Across the United States, families waited for further word on the welfare of loved ones.
We just have to keep going and praying and hope that everything turns out all right.
In Reston, Virginia, in Denver, Colorado, and in Lee's Summit, Missouri, the tension increased as news of a shootout in Karachi unfolded.
I'm just trying to figure out to find out anything about it, and even if I have to go there and bring her back.
A California travel agent waited word of his cousin's fate, one of several passengers he booked aboard Flight 73.
I'm feeling real bad, you know. It's not good.
Hello? You talk to them? They are fine? Oh, good.
Bipin Shah received the good news some 21 hours after the hostage nightmare began. Daughters Avani, age 12, and Rupal, age 9, were safe. There was relief as well at the home of hostage Hussein Shafi.
She told me, and then I started crying because I just thought that I didn't think he'd be all right.
Because, like, we're all very close. Our families, like, we're really close.
I didn't think it could happen to us at all. I couldn't believe it at first.
Karam Ali Khan believes it now and is thankful that his family's ordeal is finally over. Chuck Conder, CNN, reporting.
One of the American passengers who survived the terrorist attack says that the 2 hijackers who were not killed tried to get away by blending in with the terrified passengers as they ran from the plane. But the American, Dick Melhart of Pullman, Washington, says that furious passengers pointed out the hijackers to police. He told his wife by telephone tonight that the angry survivors almost murdered the hijackers on the spot before police could take them away. Dick Melhart is with us on the telephone now from his hotel in Karachi. Mr. Melhart, what exactly happened as you were leaving the aircraft?
Well, as we were leaving, the aircraft was parked in a remote portion of the Karachi airport, and I would guess 500 yards from the terminal. And as we were leaving, of course, it was very, very dark, and I was running as fast as I could and got to the terminal, and there was complete chaos there. And one fellow was spotted kind of by us all at one time, and 2 or 3 passengers set upon him and were beating him severely when the police intervened.
Did you feel throughout this ordeal, Mr. Melhart, did you feel any particular danger because you are an American? What was the factor of being an American on that plane?
I felt extreme danger because they collected our passports, and there were really not that many Americans, and they were making some comments, particularly to the flight attendants, about looking for the Americans. And although no actual danger, other than when they started to shoot, and of course they were shooting at everybody.
According to some wire service accounts, you were one of those who managed to get the doors open and help the others get out. Tell us about that.
Well, I had made a plan as the day wore on. I was not just going to sit there if somebody started shooting, and so I had stationed myself right beside one of the emergency exits right over the wing. And I just had made the plan, if I could, I was going to get to that door and try to get it open and escape. And when they started shooting, there was one of the flight attendants there, a fellow, and I yelled at him. I said, "Open that door," and he didn't move, and I yelled at him again, and he kind of started to move, and I could see nothing was going to happen, and I just leaped up and grabbed a hold of the door. I still was crouched down, and I jerked on it and got it part way open, and then I had to stand up, and then a bullet went right in front of me, and at the same time I got the door open and jumped out on the wing, and then was able to jump down to the runway.
I know it's hard to describe in words what it must be like to be a victim of a hijacking and a terrorist attack, but can you try to tell us your feelings when you're sitting there with some people with guns who obviously can be killers?
Well, at first, when the thing's very first going on, you're saying, "I can't believe this," and I just can't imagine this is really happening. My wife and I had discussed the possibility, and did I really want to come over here to Pakistan? And of course, in those first few hours after we were being held, I was convinced that I didn't want to be here, and why was I here, and that type of thing, and was I ever going to really see my family again, and how stupid I was to agree to come under these circumstances, and why was I traveling on Pan Am when they're one of the targets of the PLO or whoever this is, and so it's, there was an awful lot of time for thought between the very initial takeover and the end when they started shooting.
Dick Milhart, we're glad you're fine, and we wish you a speedy and safe trip home. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Our coverage of the hijacking of Pan Am Flight 73 and its aftermath continues in 2 minutes.
The death toll, at least 18. 127 people were wounded. They were shot when the terrorists opened fire with machine guns. The terrorists are believed to have panicked. The plane had suddenly been plunged into darkness. There's still some confusion whether a Pakistani commando raid had made it to the plane and by some exterior means the power was cut off, or whether the plane's auxiliary power unit simply ran out of fuel. But the lights went out, the machine guns began to fire, and the blood began to flow. It was then, apparently, that Pakistani commandos rushed the plane. 2 terrorists were killed, 2 others were captured, 1 was wounded. And it's believed now there was a 5th terrorist and that he is also being held. As commandos led the gunmen away from the plane, one shouted, "I am from Lebanon. I am a Palestinian." Among the passengers were 44 Americans. It's still not known how many Americans were among the casualties today. 1 American was killed last night when the plane was taken over. He's identified as Rajesh Kumar, a resident of California who became a U.S. citizen only 7 weeks ago. He was from Kenya. One of the survivors is Michael Fexton, a British citizen. He was in his Karachi hotel room when we reached him by telephone a short time ago. At one point during the hijacking, he believed he was scheduled for execution. Mr. Fexton, when did you first notice that something very terrible and something very dramatic was about to happen?
I suppose I'd just got on the plane. It was 6 o'clock this morning, and I was just putting my hand luggage down on my seat, and I saw at the second doorway of the plane a man with a pistol struggling with the air stewardess, and really, I mean, it was, I couldn't work out what was happening for a moment, because it's not the sort of thing that you really expect to happen to you. Then I turned round and there was another man in the doorway behind me with a security guard's uniform on. So I thought that he must have come to deal with the man with the pistol, but in fact he told us all to sit down and get our heads down, and then he was also arguing with the air stewardess, so he was also one of the terrorists.
Did they ask you for your identification? What did they say to you?
Well, at that point, very little. They just told us to keep our heads down, and then they herded the people from the front of the plane back into the main section of the plane, so we were all sitting in the gangways and crowding together. And for about an hour and a half, we just sat there with our heads down, waiting to see what would happen. And then they asked for people's passports. The stewardess came round with a bag collecting people's passports, and I handed mine in. I'm told that she actually got rid of 3 American passports that she was handed because she thought the Americans would be singled out for special treatment.
You were called to the front of the airplane, weren't you?
That's right, yes. I think this was just a piece of bad luck. I think it was just my passport was top of the pile when he was looking for a suitable Westerner.
So one of the terrorists called you to the front. What happened then?
Well, I thought for a moment whether I could just hide, and decided it was probably better not to if they came looking for me. So I walked up to the front of the plane, and the terrorist leader was standing there, and the door was slightly open, and he was negotiating with a man on the tarmac, and he was obviously making some demand at that stage, because he said that if his demand wasn't met, then they would shoot somebody.
Were you that somebody?
I think it almost certainly was me, yes. But fortunately, whatever that happened, that demand was met because he didn't shoot me.
The next big moment came when the lights went out. Tell us about that.
Obviously, the terrorists knew that something was going to happen, or they were planning something. Shortly before that, they moved everybody back into the middle of the plane, and then suddenly the lights went out. And I suppose they must have panicked or something, because they started firing the machine guns. I saw one man lying in the aisle who I suppose was shot. And there were still children on the plane, quite a lot of children, and obviously they were shouting, and then the people nearest the doors must have thought quickly and thought this was the moment to try and get out, and they started opening the doors, and then we all ran for it.
A report from Karachi, Pakistan, made just a few moments ago. And coming up, our In Focus report looks at just who may be responsible.
Israel bombed PLO headquarters in the North African country of Tunisia. In what some analysts agreed was retaliation for that, the cruise ship Aquile Loro was hijacked by gunmen working under the direction of Abu Abbas, a confederate of Arafat. They killed an old crippled passenger aboard the ship, Leon Klinghoffer of New York. After the Pan Am jet hijackers shot their way aboard the plane last night, they said they wanted to free their friends imprisoned in Cyprus. In Washington, anti-terrorism expert Bob Kupperman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies thinks the Pakistanis will find out exactly who sent the terrorists to seize the Pan Am plane.
I think they'll torture them to death.
Dr. Kupperman has a theory as to who ordered the hijacking.
It appears to me to be Arafat. It could have been the government of Libya. It could have been the PLO. It could have been some mechanism in concert. And if it is Libya, in my view, if we can sustain that position, particularly with our allies, we are going to attack Libya again, and very seriously this time.
Middle East analyst David Mizrahi believes that Libya was the power behind the hijackers because of hatred by Gaddafi of Pakistan's dictator Zia-ul-Haq.
It is in Gaddafi's best interest to see the end of President Zia's regime. That's why he has been bankrolling Benazir Bhutto. That's why he, in a way, through the Palestinians, he wanted the action to be taken at Karachi airport, and because Zia has recently arrested one of Gaddafi's men and expelled him from Pakistan.
If it turns out that Yasser Arafat gave the orders to the terrorists who attempted to hijack the Pan Am jet in Pakistan, that would put a very serious crimp in the Reagan administration's long-term hopes for working out a wider peace in the Middle East with Arafat's help. For the Independent News, Jeff Kamen, Washington.
From his California ranch, President Reagan expressed sympathy for the victims of the hijacking, but he had harsh words for the terrorists, insisting that for them, no punishment is too severe. More from John Aubuchon.
Condemnation for the hijackers and praise for Pakistan. That was the administration's stance at the end of this 18-hour ordeal. White House spokesman Larry Speaks used very strong language.
The terrorists conducted a despicable and cowardly crime by threatening, assaulting, and murdering innocent passengers on a crowded airliner, men, women, young and old, with machine guns and hand grenades. Nothing can justify such barbarism. We can think of no punishment too severe for the criminals responsible.
And at the State Department, officials had praise for the way Pakistan handled the affair.
The government of Pakistan acted boldly and decisively, and we applaud its exemplary resolve in doing so.
A hard line is exactly what the U.S. had been urging on the Pakistanis all through last night and today. The central message was, don't let that plane leave the airport. Last evening, at first word of the takeover, a State Department task force sprang into operation on the building's 7th floor, and National Security Advisor John Poindexter telephoned President Reagan at his California ranch.
There were a number of decisions that the President was required to make, but I won't be specific about what they were.
While no one would say so on the record, the President authorized the USS Forrestal to move into position in the Mediterranean so its planes could shadow any movement by the hijackers into the Middle East, and Pentagon counter-terrorist forces were put on alert. There was almost full-time open-line communication between Karachi and Washington, and American officials were at the airport advising. But the U.S. stresses that the Pakistanis were running this show.
Control of the situation at the Karachi airport was maintained by Pakistani authorities throughout.
American officials stressed that they don't know who was behind the skyjacking. Larry Speake said Libya and Muammar Gaddafi certainly have the capability, but in
the plane, he insisted that they were following a long-standing company policy, one that had been approved by the FAA.
In a situation, a circumstance like this, one of our immediate and prime objectives is to immobilize the aircraft, to turn the aircraft into a building. And the crew did exactly what they were trained to do and exactly what they were supposed to do.
As for whether a full flight crew on board could have delayed that fateful moment when the plane's power failed and the lights went out, the company's chief today said there is no way to know. For the Independent News in New York, I'm Karen Hasby.
We'll have more about the hijacking later in our newscast. On the INN Health...
Dramatically and tragically. The aircraft echoed to explosions and gunfire, and some 30 ambulances rushed to the plane. The hijack was over, but many were dead and up to 100 injured. For hours, there was confusion as to what had happened. Reports talked of passengers flinging themselves from the aircraft in panic.
All of a sudden, shooting.
With machine gun?
With machine gun and grenades. They used both. But because I am in the front, I didn't see much. But all of a sudden, the doors are open. I went through the door which opens to on the window. I get up on the window, and there are so many people are there, already gunshot wounded with blood and everything. Then they said the raft is the other door. Then what? Some people are jumped out from there, but they succeed, I think. Then I will help all these people with the air hostess to go again to the aircraft because the wings cannot. Then I helped them to go down through the raft. We came out.
Pakistani authorities explained what had taken place. The generator at the rear of the jet was switched off by the Pakistani commandos, or ran out of fuel. Plunged into darkness, the terrorists inside the plane went crazy, firing machine guns and letting off explosives. Desperate to escape, passengers opened some of the doors, and an emergency chute was inflated. Only then did the Pakistani commandos grapple with the hijackers. The Arab gunmen were taken away under heavy guard, one of them shouting that he was a Palestinian from Lebanon. The Pakistanis were working in close liaison with the Americans on the hijack, and it looks clear that they had decided not to let the plane fly on elsewhere. But it's still not clear whether the Pakistanis intended the hijack to end like this, or whether events overtook them.
A family friend says there is hatred in the Huntington Beach, California home of Rajesh Kumar. Kumar was the first victim of the hijacking and the only American known to have died. It may have been his new U.S. citizenship that led to his death. Reports say Kumar was singled out and called to the front of the plane by the hijackers. When he told them he was an American, he was shot and thrown out of the plane. Kumar was naturalized just 3 weeks ago, and he was bringing his aunt and grandmother to the U.S.
Before any formal charges are filed, the 4 Palestinians, one of whom is hospitalized with shotgun wounds, face at least 2 weeks of interrogation. Pakistan's president says the 4 will face the death penalty if convicted. The death toll from Friday's incident now stands at 19, following the death today of a wounded Mexican survivor. Another victim has already been declared brain dead, but is being kept alive by life support systems. A teenage survivor of Friday's hijacking is fighting for his life in a West German hospital. CNN's Jim Clancy has more on his condition and that of other Americans wounded during the siege of Pan Am Flight 73.
Young Americans are paying a heavy price for the terrorist gunfire aboard Pan Am 73. A State Department spokesman said the number of children and old people caught up in the ordeal was a shocking revelation of the cynicism of the hijackers.
I can't imagine any political goal that would justify putting 4-year-old, 2-year-old children through such a trauma.
U.S. doctors say a teenaged boy remains in critical condition after undergoing surgery for a bullet wound in the head. The boy is hospitalized in Landstuhl with his mother, who suffered 2 broken heels when she leaped from the plane Friday night. Another American, a 16-year-old girl, is listed in satisfactory condition with gunshot wounds in the face and shoulder. 3 other U.S. nationals, some of whom were operated on Sunday, are listed in good condition. Doctors say 2 small children who weren't hit by gunfire but suffered psychological trauma were also being treated.
These young children, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, showing evidence of fear, just abnormal reactions along those lines when they've been exposed to the kind of horror and stress that they underwent on that airplane.
In all, 6 Americans and 3 others are being treated at military hospitals here. The 3 most seriously injured could take weeks to recover. Most of the other Americans that are hospitalized here in West Germany are expected to go home by the end of the week. Still, doctors say some have suffered nerve damage that could cause them problems for years to come. Jim Clancy, CNN, Wiesbaden.
More than 100 survivors of the hijacking of Pan Am Flight 73 flew into New York's Kennedy International Airport together last night, then went on to their separate destinations. For Dr. Abdullah Khartri, there was this happy reunion awaiting in Birmingham, Alabama. Surrounded by family and friends, Khartri said the hijacking was a frightening experience. He also admitted there were a few moments when he was certain his life was over. However, he added, he has come out of the ordeal with a new perspective on what is important.
We take little things of life for granted. Many good things of life which we have, we take for granted. I realize how important they were. My family, my friends, and that time the values of life also became quite different,
When reporters asked Khartri what he thinks should be done with the hijackers, he said that emotionally he would like to see them tortured.
As the hijackers opened fire on the hostages, America's elite anti-terrorism force was leaving on a rescue mission. CNN's Carl Rochelle has a look at the role the Delta Force might have played.
Delta, the Army's elite counterterrorism force, was mobilized to help Pakistan deal with the hijackers aboard the Pan Am 747 at the Karachi airport last Friday, but the hijacking ended before the Delta Force ever got there. Pakistan had given permission for the Delta team to come, but just how they would have been utilized had not been worked out. The Delta, like the Army's other special operations forces, regularly practices entering buildings and aircraft and rescuing hostages while disorienting and disabling terrorists. In the Karachi hijacking, the Delta Force could have stormed the aircraft, or it could have provided advice and equipment to the Pakistani commandos. This is not the first time counterterrorism teams have not made it to the scene in time. Last year, Navy SEALs were scrambled in response to the hijacking of an Egyptian airliner. But Air Force planes that were to take them to Cyprus had mechanical difficulties, and to cap things off, Cyprus denied them permission to land. It was over before the SEALs could get in position to help. One solution would be to set up a counterterrorism unit in Europe, closer to the scene of potential terrorist acts. But that wouldn't be without problems either.
One of the concerns we have is rules of engagement. In other words, under what rules can you engage terrorists? Well, we have some major disagreements with our allies over whether terrorists really constitute foreign enemies that can be engaged by NATO forces or therefore using NATO bases.
Some equipment has been secretly placed in Europe to give counterterrorism forces a head start in dealing with a future crisis. But as much as they want help, even our closest allies are afraid that having a Delta or SEAL unit in their country would be like setting up a lightning rod for terrorists.
Pan Am Flight 73 mistakenly considered their mission a failure and decided to kill as many hostages as possible. The 4 gunmen, ranging in age between 18 and 25, are in the custody of military intelligence. The one wounded hijacker has been identified as 18-year-old Mohammed Radwan, traveling on a Jordanian passport. 3 other terrorists are identified by nationality, a Bahrainian, a Lebanese, and a Palestinian. The 4 gunmen held the plane for 16 hours. Inside the plane, the mood was described as ugly. Survivors say all the passengers were herded into the center of the aircraft. The blinds were drawn, and suddenly the lights went out. The passengers were forced to sit in the darkness. Then the leader of the terrorist group gave the order to open fire.
The chap at the front had the machine gun, and he was blaring away with that.
Indiscriminately?
Indiscriminately. Children, women, men.
I was near the exit. That was my plan, and I jumped up and jerked the door open and jumped out on the way.
Some got away by jumping from the aircraft's wing, like Mohammed Tariq, who was injured in the fall.
No, there were no security forces around the airplane. I looked when I came out. I specifically looked under the airplane and on the sides. There were no Pakistan security forces. They had not come that close.
The chief of Pakistan's civil aviation was on the tarmac when the shooting started.
Through the megaphone, we said, "Where are our people? Where are the commandos? They must come out." Apparently, nobody was there in the vicinity at the time.
He claims the terrorists panicked in the darkened aircraft, but that the power failure was no rescue attempt, only the result of a generator running out of fuel. Some officials say it took up to 15 minutes for Pakistani commandos to finally reach the plane. Even so, the nation's president praised his troops.
I'm very proud of them because I think the handling was professional, it was bravely handled.
But the debate over the rescue attempt has little consequence to those people who died or survived the tragic end to this hijacking.